Hey everyone, welcome to Rick's Woodworking. Today we're going to build a simple table. This is going to be 3 feet by 5 feet, kind of like a 3 by 5 card. 30 inches tall, standard height, and you can see some of the other dimensions. 32 inches at the base, 2-inch overhangs, 8 inches at the end. So let's start by cutting the boards for the top. This table is built with 6 2x6s and 2 2x4s. Right now I'm just cutting the 2x6s to length, and that would be the 5 feet. And the remnants I then use for the cleats that hold the table from underneath and the base of the legs. And for the base of the legs, I cut an extra 45-degree angle on the tops to give it a nicer look. And later we'll do some additional work on those. Now I'm spent a lot of time selecting the lumber at the lumberyard. Well, lumberyard, it was Home Depot. And I want to make sure that I get the best face towards the top, and also for the edge pieces that they have the best edges. Now that I have that all done, I'm going to mark a line that is offset back to compensate for the 2x4s that make up the leg and that 8-inch overhang that I talked about earlier, and then the 2 inches on the end. Now, using my square, I make sure that the cleat that holds the bottom of the table together is square to that first piece. And I pre-drilled everything, because even though this is pine, I wanted to make sure that the screws went in and set properly. If you don't do this, the top board may not seat all the way down. Now, once I have that first screw in, I double check the square, because things move, and then I'll put in the second screw. And now I'm going to repeat it on the other side. Again, using the square, pre-drilling, and making sure everything is set up properly. Again, I'm not using fancy joinery here. This is basic construction. This is something you can build in a weekend, and I wanted to make sure I could build it in a weekend. Once I did both sides of the table itself, I went ahead and started staining. And I stained all the edges, because it's going to be a lot harder to do that later once the board's all put together. Imagine trying to put your brush in between the 2x6s. So while that's drying, I came back to the bases for the legs, and I'm going to do a 45-degree cut and then a 1.5-inch overcut. This will raise the legs up a little bit, give them a little lighter look, and also take them away from the moisture. This is going to be outside on the lanai, and even though it's covered, I don't want the moisture to sit at the bottom and wake up through the entire length of the board. I also added some small plastic feet later on. I could have done this at the chop saw, but it's 2 cuts that I have to do per leg and 2 pieces overall. So I just decided to freehand it with my saw, and then did a plunge cut here. Now, you might think, hey, couldn't you just use a jigsaw for that? And you could, but the jigsaw doesn't cut quite as straight as I'd like, especially with this kind of grainy wood. So I just used the saw, the circular saw, and then finished it off with the jigsaw. And there you have it. The piece will come loose, and you'll see the final product. Now I'm going to start cutting the 2x4s that'll make up the standards for those legs. They're all set to make sure that the top comes out at 30 inches. And again, used just 2 pieces of 2x4 for the whole table. Now, again, using the square, I'm going to pre-drill, and I'll end up putting 4 screws on the bottom and 4 screws on the top. Currently, I'm using the other base of the leg just to hold the 2x4s up so that everything is nice and flat. And then I'll do the same thing for the other side. And here I'm doing the top cleat. Now that the stain has dried, I can start doing some assembly. I set up this level, my yellow level at the end there, to act as a stop, so all the pieces are lined up properly. And I'm going to put in 2 screws. Now you might think, hey, shouldn't you put in 4? But this, again, is going to be outside, and the boards will be shrinking and swelling over time with change in humidity. So 2 screws in the center of each board on each one of these cleats will hold it all together. And now to the other side. And I'm using a 3/4 inch spacer between them, and that works out really well. It's a little tighter in the center, but no big deal. And here I'm just pre-drilling everything so that I can put in the additional screw. With that assembly done, it's time to do some more staining. I wanted to make sure that I got everything, all the surfaces stained properly. All the crevices, all the joints. Again, this is outside, and it's just plain pine, not pressure treated or anything. And I chose that because I wanted to feel safe eating on the surface. And this is the bottom of the top. And once the stain dried overnight, I came back and found the center of the cleat that holds the tabletop together, and then the center of the leg assembly. Lining those 2 up, I clamped them in place, and I'm going to use some construction screws. These are beefy 4-inch screws to hold it all together, and they're going to come in from the end, pre-drilling, and sandwich that 2x4 that makes up the post, if you will, of the leg through the outer 2x4 cleat into the 2x6 that holds the table together. Now with the legs assembled, you'd think this is strong enough, but I really wanted to create this cross bracing. And so what I did is basically set up the cross brace on one side to get the angle, used a little 2x4 as my set, and used my set square, my bevel guide, and again used the circular saw for this cut. And could have done it in the chop saw, but it's 2 cuts that I have to do. With that done, I set it back up, and now I'm going to mark the other angle. And like before, I just used the straight edge, completed the line, and went at it with my circular saw. Now there's 2 cross braces, and I'm going to use this first one as the model or the template for the second one. And here's checking the fit, and I put a little 2x4 as a stop at the end there. And here you have both of them, with again some 2x4s as stops. I don't want to see the screws from the outer part, so I screwed in from the bottom. Now this slid on me a little bit, and after it was assembled and off camera, I actually relocated it so that it was a little higher. But now here I put a couple of screws on the cleat side, so towards the bottom edge of the table, and 1 screw through the cross brace. One on this side and the other on the other side. With the assembly complete, I went ahead and chamfered the bottoms of all the 2x6s. I wanted to make sure that you didn't hit a sharp corner at any point. And then on the top, a nice round over. And that was really it for the heavy duty construction part. Everything now is sanding. And I wanted to sand the edges. This is the cut ends. Took it down to 150 grit. Spent a bit of time with it, and then just used the sander to smooth that edge with the router. Could have done this by hand, but had the sander right there, and it was a pretty quick job. Nice smooth edge. And now those tops are smooth. Those boards were extremely smooth, but you never really know. So I went at it again, started with 100 grit, and ended up at 150. It didn't take more than like 10 or 15 minutes to do the entire surface, and just again checked it to make sure everything was good. Once I was done, it was time to stain. I actually used a blower, just a leaf blower to take all the sawdust off. And you'll notice that I'm using a rag here to put the stain down, where before I was using a brush. This gives me more control over the stain, and it gives me the opportunity to rub off some of the runs that happened when we were doing the edges. You can't really see it on the piece when it's finished, but as you're staining now, you might see that, and this gives me the opportunity to really level it all out. I only gave one coat of stain because I want this to weather a little bit, and I'll come back and do some more sanding and then give it a second coat probably in 6 months. With the top done, I went ahead and wiped everything down, gave it about 2 or 3 minutes to soak in, and then I went at the edges. And that's really about it. This is a simple build. Like I said, it's a weekend build. Could have done it a lot faster if I didn't take the time to stain in between. But you'll see at the end that it's a pretty good looking table. I could have done some fancier joinery, especially with the leg portions, but this is a simple outdoor table. And here you will see that when I set it outside, it's next to some of my other pieces. I hope you enjoyed this build. You can do it yourself in a weekend. And thanks for watching. Join us next time on Rick's Woodworking.